Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sally Quinn, a contributor to the Washington Post, an author and journalist for many years. I'm also the founder of On Faith, which a religion website I started for the Washington Post. And that's where I really learned so much about Islam that was really eye-opening to me. In fact, I did my first panel on Islam at Georgetown 11 years ago when I first started the website. So, and one of the first people I met was Daisy Khan and Imam Khan, who became very close friends of mine. And so I was thrilled when Daisy asked me to moderate this panel today because it's a subject that I'm passionate about, as is Daisy and so many of my friends. There's Daisy right there, you all know her. So I think what we'll do right now, because we have so many panelists and so little time, and so much to say. So I'm going to just start right in with Kamar. And so you're going to have to, okay, the fabulous Kamar is going to, I'm going to ask you about tell me about what it is about the political landscape in Muslim countries, particularly, that has allowed the rise of extremism. What has contributed to this?
Thank you. In 20 seconds or less, yeah? Well, thank you for inviting me and having such a great day, Daisy Khan.
Can you put the mic a little closer to your mouth?
How's this?
Yeah.
I think the conventional answer is that with a great deal of instability, fragile states, weak institutions, combined of weak governance, combined of changing of geopolitics in the region, has really allowed a number of forces to rise. The invasion of Iraq did not help, but it instead gave to a state, no matter what you said about Iraq, it was a state that held itself together, but opened a whole Pandora's box to create a new elevated form of ideology, thinking what they now call bin Ladenism ideology, to recreate society that is different from what was initially thought of after independence in the 40s and 50s and 60s. A new independent state that is religiously based from an imagined past of a past that's sacred, the Caliph period, and that sacred period would allow for more of a empowered region to withstand Western influences, to withstand internal strife, civil issues, civil society issues, and weak governance, and so forth. So one of the conventional answers is to point to the invasion of Iraq, but there's been violent extremism for decades in the region and around the region. Particularly in the Muslim majority countries, those that have less of institutions that allow public participation, allow civil society to participate, allows voices to be heard, divergent voices, diverse voices, pluralistic voices. Those are the states that need to sustain their states with, unfortunately, with an iron fist.
I'm going to come back to you on that, but what I'd like to do is just go down the row and get each one of you to just say something, 2 or 3 minutes, just about what your field is and what your topic today is.
Starting with?
So I'll get back to you, don't worry. No. Well, I want to save him till last. No, all right, well, okay, let's go ahead.
It's only because I have a hard leave at 2:15.
Okay, the reason is that I thought you're going to be really interesting. And we want to spend, not that everybody else isn't, but you are a former...
well, supporter of the global jihadi culture. I mean, this was 1995. Right. I won't take too much of your time because I do got to leave, and if you don't mind me just making my way, So, 95, I met the Taliban. I became extremist. 98, bin Laden came out. We thought, okay, he's the guy. I got married. I had my kid. I calmed down a bit. 9/11.
Where were you living at this time?
In Canada.
In Canada. So you became an extremist in Canada.
Yeah, I did. It was stupid. I had a house party. My cha-cha walked in on it. I was shame and guilt tripped into thinking I did so bad. So I said, okay, let me get religious, fix myself. So in 2001, when the 9/11 attacks happened, I realized, man, I don't know Islam. I don't know Arabic, tafsir. So I decided I'm going to go to Syria. I studied Islam in Syria 2 years. Went through what I realized was the de-radicalization process, what they call. I came back to Canada, became operated with the intelligence service.
The Canadian intelligence.
The Canadian Security Intelligence
So
Service.
you basically turned.
Well, no, because I came with a newfound appreciation for being a Muslim in the West.
I see.
And I was ready to sign on the dotted line, basically. The Iraq War had happened in 2003, and that destabilized a lot of things. I was there. I was invited to go and fight, but I wasn't there to fight. I was there to study Islam properly. So came back, became operational, and the last case that I worked on, 2006, became a big public controversial case called the Toronto 18. 18 guys got arrested. And that was the first dose of homegrown terrorism, at least in that period. It was really after the Iraq War that you start to see the Boston bombings, London bombings, this and that. By 2010, the Syrian war had begun. 2012, Arab Spring kicked off. 13, 14, and 15, I watched the rise of ISIS in real time. I debated, trolled, tracked ISIS foreign fighters, and using Islam as the counter message, if I can just plug back into the title, Islamic Theology versus Extremist Ideology. So now what I do, because of my practitioner experience, because of a very pro-Muslim approach, I'm the creeping Sharia guy in the special forces, where I want our people to know, right, that this is not a war on Islam. Don't say that. That would be a suicide mission. Just the narratives, the positive narratives that we need to have. So one of the things that I think in the book, I think you detailed some of my work on Twitter with extremism. So I'll leave it at some messages that I deliver out. So don't say radical Islamic terrorism as if it's some kind of counterterrorism abracadabra, okay? The correct term would be terrorism in Islamic costume. And I have been specifically using, and the Muslims here will know, the ahadith, the authentic prophetic narrations of the Prophet ﷺ about the Khawarij, who were a deviant sect, who were known to hijack cities, whisper to Muslim children to go and make hijrah to their lands. In fact, if you really want to go to in the Sahih Hadith, that the Antichrist himself will come from these people. حَتَّى يَخْرُجُوا الدَّجَّالِ فِي بَقِيَّتِهِمْ. So I wield these narratives, pro-Islamic, using the Islamic scriptures, because it's not enough for us to say ISIS has nothing to do with Islam, but it is also wrong to say that ISIS is Islamic. And I think it will come to the leaders in your countries to bring that message out. So thank you for even having me for this few moments.
You're a practicing Muslim now?
Alhamdulillah, yes. Believers, and I like your interfaith stuff that you're doing later on. It's very, very important. My friend Sammy Rangel will be on a panel later. We met at the Google Summit in 2011, where they brought ultra-nationalists, white supremacists, Islamists, and urban street gangs together and showed, so when you talk about extremist recruitment and radicalization, it's not just something that happens to brown people.
What do you do now?
I train government now. I'm an independent government advisor. I am the person advising the CENTCOM command staff, so I do a lot of the government stuff, the practitioner stuff. But once in a while, if I want to argue with a Khawarij extremist online, I'll do that.
So when you realized that this was not for you, was there a defining moment? Was it 9/11? I mean,
Well,
what was a defining moment where you said, "Oh my God, this is not what I signed up for"?
It was 9/11. Yeah. I thought there's something fundamentally wrong with flying planes into buildings. So when I train the military, I tell them that jihad is a war tradition with rules of engagement. So terrorism is to jihad what war crimes are to rules of engagement. So these are the kinds of narratives to get exact and then to deploy and to reinforce it. Use those terms. When people say radical Islamic terrorism, say it. No, terrorism in Islamic costume, because they want to hear the Islamic part. But we want to show them that it's a costume, it's a cover, it's a deviation from what is Islam.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I got to leave, so
well,
God bless.
Thank you very much for talking to us.
Myself?
Yes.
what do you like me to talk about?
Okay, well,
Imam
The
Basharat.
question about
okay,
yes.
well,
So
all right then.
it's Imam Basharat. So if you just, Sally, if you just ask Imam Basharat, because his
Okay,
question.
I
yeah.
didn't know whether they were going to each one have a sort of statement first.
No, they're not going to have a
Oh,
statement.
yeah, no
'cause You're just going to
statements.
ask the question.
Okay, then I'm going to ask the question. Okay, so, well then why don't I do it in order here? Because, all right, we've done Kumar, right? And we're going to, Kumar, we're going to get back to you. Daisy, you're next.
Oh. I wasn't trying to be next, but
Okay, why did you do this? I mean, you've written this book, and it's at least 100 pages are dedicated to comparing Islam to ideology of extremist. And why did you decide to do this now?
well, Sally, I think that Mubin already mentioned that we believe that extremists are just using religion as a veneer to mobilize people. It's the
Can you bring your mic closer to you?
yeah, extremists are using religion as a veneer. It has been done in the past by other groups, and now they're doing it. And we really want to make it very clear to people how they're doing that. So the research that we set out to do with RRG, which is in the book, we were able to show that they don't only exploit one term, like the kind of term that most people hear about jihad, but they actually have exploited like 8 core concepts of Islam. And when they use them collectively together, it's very powerful because they can convince a novice who may not be religious that these terms are in fact authentic, because they use authentic names, authentic terms. So if you look at the slide in the back, the terms are all listed on the left side, and they actually build it up from al-wala wal-bara, which basically means loyalty and disavowal. In other words, us versus them. Then they build it up to ummah, which means the worldwide Muslim community, but they've defined that as we are the only ones that are the true ummah now, because we're the only righteous people. And then they go on to say that because we're the only other righteous people, everybody else is a kafir or non-believer, including fellow Muslims. And then they go on to say, since we are the righteous people and we're the chosen ones, you all have to give your allegiance to us, because then that means, you know, you are with the protected group. And then if you're doing that, you better come and fight with us, because we have a big fight going on right now, and that's jihad. And in order for you to make jihad, you have to make a hijrah, which means you have to travel and come wherever we are, because we got to do it together. And then you have to be willing to give your life and become a martyr. And you know, the only way we can really do this is if we all come together and unite and under one banner, which is the Khilafah. So you can see on the left side we have the Islamic concepts. In the middle we have yellow, which is the actual definition of Islam. And on the right side is a fake, you know, definition, which is what they do. So we wanted to show very clearly to people how different it is. And it does not get more clear than that. And this is an educational tool for our community. It's also an educational tool for the general public, which is very confused. And that is why we spent 100 pages on it, and that is why I brought all these eminent scholars and you know, didn't have to pull their arm. I just had to call Qasim and say, you need to write this article, and he's like, okay, let me do the research. So everybody has poured their heart out into this because they really want to tell the true narrative, and that's why we've spent the 100 pages. So I want to thank all the scholars that have done this.
Well, Kabir, you know, I've had many arguments with my friends who don't know anything about Islam, and they will about jihad, because they think it's a lot of crazy people waving black flags and cutting off people's heads, and they don't understand the spiritual part of jihad. So I think if you could explain to us what your definition of jihad is and what it means and why it's important for particularly people in Western culture to understand what it really means.
Great, thank you, Sally. Is this working? Should it be working?
No, it's working.
Here?
It's working.
Working, good. Okay, so I've prepared a few under 3 minutes to answer your questions, Sally. So holy war, jihad simply means struggle or effort. Holy war, not holy war. According to the Prophet Muhammad, The greatest jihad is the spiritual struggle with our own egos. The lesser jihad is the outward struggle for justice, the defense of freedom and human rights, which may sometimes include taking up arms. The greater jihad is the daily struggle to fulfill our true purpose in life and become a better human being, a compassionate servant of the divine. This greater jihad ultimately prepares us to be more effective in the struggle for social justice and peace, the lesser jihad. Egoism is the ultimate idolatry, the greatest corrupter of all human endeavors, including, tragically, religion. Today, the people who are attracted to violent extremism believe they are serving God, but actually, they are servants of a collective egoism that is, in the end, a manifestation of tyranny. For such individuals and groups, religion is primarily understood as a series of tests and rules to be followed, a strictly defined program of behaviors and prohibitions. They contend that the more exactly you follow their program, the more you will please God. Frequently, what accompanies this mentality is the compulsion to impose rules, behaviors, dress codes, and prohibitions on others in order to please God, who will grant success and a heavenly reward to those who follow and enforce these commands. The great poet Rumi describes these people in this way. A self-righteous person sees someone sin, and the flames of hell rise up in him. He calls his own hellish pride defense of the religion. He doesn't notice his own arrogant soul. In other words, they distort Islam into a religion of fear rather than a religion of love and mercy, and manipulate the truth to serve an agenda of power and control. These are the people and groups who have also distorted the lesser jihad from the struggle for justice into a strategy of violent domination. In doing so, they betray the most fundamental principles of Islamic character: compassion, respect for freedom of conscience, and acceptance of diversity. Shockingly, they believe they are doing God's will by spreading hatred and terror. This mentality is not new in Islam, and the time has come to recognize that there have been elements of classical Islamic law that justify or condone actions that are unacceptable under today's highest ideals of universal human rights. As a matter of principle, if anything in Islamic law harms human beings or negatively affects the harmony and well-being of humanity, it cannot be considered Islamic. These are distortions of the original message, not intrinsic aspects of Islam, and therefore we are obliged to correct mistakes that human beings have introduced in God's name. Ever since 9/11, the people of the world have been unconsciously asking and waiting to be reassured that they do not need to fear Muslims. On May 22nd, 2017, the world's largest Muslim young adults movement issued an historic declaration calling for reform of the problematic tenets within Islamic orthodoxy. The Declaration on Humanitarian Islam, this is from Indonesia, provides a concrete strategy and roadmap explicitly designed to address obsolete tenets of classical Islamic law, which are premised upon perpetual conflict with those who do not embrace or submit to Islam. We are entering a hopeful time when the spirit of Islam can prevail and bring about a world in which Islam and Muslims are truly beneficent and contribute to the well-being of humanity.
Mr. Malabari. Is that you?
Assalamu alaikum.
Yes. I want to ask you about the
Hello. Yes. I may start with the.
Well, I wanted to ask you about the Prophet Muhammad, because I think that there is some misunderstanding about the fact that he was a man of war and a man of violence,
Yes.
when in fact I think most people don't realize that most of his time he was trying to create peace. But the extremists have used him as an example of a man of violence and used that as a way to draw people to them. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I may start with, from the outset, with one of the sayings of the Prophet. Afshu salam tadkhulul jannata bi salam. Spread the peace and you will enter the paradise with peace, in peace. Actually, Prophet ﷺ came to a world, war-torn world. In 23 years, he changed to a peaceful world. Islam means, after submission, two meanings. Islam has two meanings. One is submission to God, other is salam, peace. So the essence of Islam is spreading peace. Peace with yourself, peace with your society, peace with your neighborhood, peace with the whole world. Then you will enter a paradise in peace. Salam and salama. So every ideology, especially ISIS's ideology, is to the exactly against the core teachings of Islam. So Prophet, I have explained in my book, Prophet, the mercy of the legacy of the Prophet to the whole creation. He was a peaceable and he was a mercy for all the creation. So now some of the people consider non-Muslims kafir. What the kafir means? Actually, kafir means the one who knew the truth and concealed it. These millions of non-Muslims, they even didn't know about Islam. It is our fault, the Muslims' fault, the extremist Muslims' fault that they don't know Islam, what is Islam all about. So we cannot call them kafir as such. So what Islam wanted is to spread the peace. And that is the life, mission, and work of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam.
Rabia, how do Muslims fight against injustices today in the world when they are accused of so many injustices?
Thank you. I appreciate it. We need to be less concerned about what people think of us and more concerned of what Allah thinks of us. We're responsible to the creator of the universe for the welfare of the world. Who cares if they like us or don't like us? It's our responsibility to consecrate our actions, Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim, in the name of God, all compassionate, most merciful. That's the keystone to social change. Not violence, not hatred. It's rahmah. It's mercy and compassion that reaches people's hearts and creates change in behavior. The meaning of justice is the restoration of wholeness. And if we believe that it's about the obliteration of our enemies, we've fallen into the trap of the devil. The object of the real enemy of humanity is to divide human beings from each other, break us away from an awareness of the divine, and intoxicate ourselves with false ideas of supremacy. The second thing we need to remember is that the devil always says the trademark of the force of evil, which is not a person, it's a thing, an idea that passes from mind to mind. You've created, he said to God in rebellion, you've created that, me from fire, and that, the human being from clay. I'm better. So any time when we're working for change, if we believe we are fundamentally and intrinsically better than our opponent, we have walked into a trap. We cannot operate cleanly. We cannot operate in the spirit of Islam. The third point that I want to make about that is that the Quran itself teaches that the object of an Islamic conflict is to win the heart of the opposition. And while we cannot always guarantee that we will win the heart of the opposition, we have to make that a possibility in every struggle in which we engage, which means that people must admire us. The point is not that people fear us or are disgusted by us. They need to admire us. And so the Quran gives the teaching, repel evil with that which is better. And that rule helps every conflict in which we might find ourselves engaged. Don't sink beneath the level of your opponent. Raise the level of the encounter. Have to do that.
You. Mr. Kalimuddin?
Yes.
Yes. I think that so many people, not only in this country but around the world, misunderstand the Prophet Muhammad and what he stands for. Can you give us, and particularly from the difference between how Muslims see him and also various different sects of Muslims as well. But can you give us an idea of what the difference is between the way the Westerners see the Prophet Muhammad and the way Muslims see him?
Yeah. First of all, I give those details. Let me clarify one point. One thing, that the article that you see in the book compiled by Daisy Khan, Maulana Wahiduddin Khan is a scholar I'm representing on his behalf. He is an internationally renowned Islamic scholar, a prolific writer. He authored over 100 books, and he's a peace activist, and he has gotten International Peace Award, the Democrats International Peace Award for Nuclear Disarmament. He shared this award with Desmond Tutu, Andrew Bykov, and Gorbachev. And he, at that time, he wrote a book that is Ideology of Peace. And 2 years ago, he was here at the United States Institute of Peace, and he released a book, latest book, that is called Age of Peace, which is available outside for free of cost. You can pick that book on your way home. And coming back to the question, the Muslims see Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace be upon him, as the last of the prophets under the full light of history. He is a divine guide and a mercy to mankind. He was the man of high moral character and principles, was tolerant, truthful, forbearing, and trustworthy. No one, including his detractors, could deny these characteristics. One time, I think Abu Sufyan, at the court of Roman Empire, he inquired about Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how he was. Does he speak truth, or does he lie? All these things. He said, no. He is a man of high characteristics. Then what's the problem? So only thing the Quraysh had a problem was that he's taking people away from the ancestors' religion. And maybe they had the economic interest in the ancestors' religion, that's why they were denying him. But they could not lie about him that he is a liar or not trustworthy, etc. In spite of all that, still they spoke the truth that he is trustworthy. And Quran characterizes him as a man of truly sublime character. He used to be called Al-Amin, that is meaning truthful custodian and unfailing trustee. He had no hate or malice against anyone. He respected all communities. On this point, I would like to allude one incident in Medina. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was sitting with his companions at one place where a funeral of a Jew was passing by. So seeing that, immediately Prophet stood up in respect. So his companions immediately told, "Oh Prophet, this is the funeral of a Jew." Then immediately he quipped or said that, "Alaysat nafsan," was he not a human being? So that's where he saw a Jew or anyone else as a human being. There is a commonality. So everyone is worthy of respect. So that's what he had in his, was the high character. Dr. Michael Hart, he's an American author. He wrote a book, The 100. He researched the people who impacted on the lives of the people in the human history. So he found Prophet Muhammad as the person who is supremely successful on religious and secular level. He put him on the top of even Jesus Christ or Newton. So he chose people from all fields. So but he could not say why was he so supremely successful. The reason, a single reason, which is summarized by one of the British author, he says that he faced adversity with a determination to wring success out of failure. This is the key to success. He faced adversity with determination to wring, W-R-I-N-G, to squeeze, wring success out of failure. So actually, in fact, his wife Aisha said about this character of Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, whenever a problem when he faced, so always he chose an easier option. He never went for harder option. So there is a great lesson here from the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam that in order to solve problems, one has to choose an easier option. So whatever people are trying to do today, and in the age of peace also, the Sheikh Wahiduddin writes that one can, today the world has come to the point, and due to the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam who started this process during his time, now it has reached to the culmination of freedom and free of religious persecution. Now every person has an opportunity to do anything without resorting to violence. So this has to be taught or made, as Daisy Khan says, so knowledge ends the violence, or ends the terrorism. Sheikh also written many books, and one of this pamphlet, The Root Cause of Terrorism and Its Solution. It is worth reading that they have developed an ideology using political interpretation of Islam, which is not at all there in Quran and Hadith. Islam did not come to rule the world, but to make people spiritual, to lead a spiritual life and try for getting into heaven. The terrorist people, they made an ideology. They synthesized an ideology using Quran and Hadith. So we have to prove that that political interpretation of Islam is alien to Islam. It is completely alien to Islam, and this has to be spread, including Muslims and non-Muslims alike. So that's the single point. The political interpretation of Islam is the one that has caused all these problems today. So once it has been ignored and disowned and publicized, I think until that time, this ideology cannot be removed. So
I think that's a very good point. Thank you. And we may want to get back to that in a minute. But I wanted to talk to Imam Bashar. um, the Prophet, when the Prophet Muhammad was being persecuted, he left Mecca for Medina, and the ISIS or Daesh or whatever you want to call them are now using this as an example of why people should migrate and migrate not toward them and toward their caliphate. How do you explain that?
First of all, I just would like to thank also Daisy Khan for these wonderful efforts that you have done and collected all of this research, because we need it today for different purposes, academic and religious and for the media. This concept of al-hijra, migration, is really one of the things that unfortunately Daesh has used and manipulated the beautiful meaning of hijra that is mentioned in the Quran 24 times in different contexts. But first of all, it is something to further one's faith as well as to aim to build a just society. That's the whole concept of migration. Either you go to improve your spiritual life or intellectual life, and also to help in building a just society. And that's where we see in the time of the Prophet, he asked some of his disciples who could not protect themselves to migrate to Abyssinia. And Abyssinia back then, which is Ethiopia of today, was ruled by a Christian king. And the Prophet advised his disciples to go and live under a Christian rule where there is justice. And this is, by the way, today where we see a lot of Muslims are migrating from the Middle East and Africa to either Europe or to the United States, where there are a lot of Christian communities. We are seeing the history repeating itself. But I just wanted to say that, unfortunately, there are groups like Daesh and Boko Haram and the Shabab and others who are saying, come and make hijrah in order to build a khilafah. And all the scholars today, they are saying, excuse me, what kind of khilafah you are building? You are killing people. You are creating mischief in the land. This is completely different than the caliphate that was during the time of the Prophet and the rightly guided caliphs. So the whole concept of migration, we see it in the Quran, that even Moses himself, he migrated to seek knowledge. And today we see a lot of people migrating even to advance in knowledge, because this is something we read about it in the Quran, وَقُلْ رَبِّ زِدْنِي عِلْمًا. Or when the Prophet migrated from Mecca to Medina, where he could not convey the message anymore, after he asked some to go to Abyssinia, and he stayed for several years after that, and then he went to Medina. The migration of the Prophet to Medina was not to kill people, but actually it was to build a just society, where the ultimate fruits of this migration was La ikraha fi din. There is no compulsion in religion. Today we see Daesh and others, they want to force people either to their own ideology of killing, or those minorities are persecuted where they have been living there for hundreds of years and thousands of years. And the Muslims never did anything to them. So that's where we need to make it very clear that the true ultimate goals of hijrah is really to give women their rights, to give minorities their rights, and to ensure that there is no compulsion in religion. And that's what we see today, where Muslims are migrating to America and Europe, and they are in so many ways finding better circumstances than these countries that are called either Muslims or majority or minority. So this is something really, I wish that we have more conferences to talk about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Qasim.
Hi.
So we've seen the Taliban destroying and other terrorist groups destroying antiquities, and particularly the most shocking one was the Bamyan Buddhist statues in Afghanistan. why are they doing this? And is there any justification for this in Islam?
So the short answer is not only is there no justification for this kind of barbarity and destruction in Islam, but they're doing this because this is the dangers of having no knowledge of Islam and trying to create policy based on this. In studying how Daesh justifies this barbarity, you find them not only distort and misrepresent the Quran, but fabricate policy that doesn't exist. So on one example, they cite the great prophet Abraham, that he destroyed idols, and say, therefore, this is justification to destroy idols. But what they ignore is that the prophet Abraham destroyed his own idols in his own home. He destroyed his own property. And he did so to send a message that these idols are unable to speak, they're unable to hear, they cannot respond to you. And as the Quran relates a story that the elders came and asked him, who has destroyed these idols? And he responds with a beautiful argument, someone's destroyed them, why don't you ask the idols? And the idols obviously couldn't respond. And so in destroying his own idols, he was waging what, as Muslims, we call the true jihad. It was a jihad of self-reformation, a jihad of purging idolatry from within oneself, because Islam teaches Tawheed, the unity of God. And in addition to that, there's a really critical component to look at. The sheer fact that these statues, these Buddhist statues, have survived for so many centuries. I'm a member of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. We're led by a spiritual caliphate. And the same week that Daisy asked me to write this article, our Khalifa had given a beautiful Jummah khutbah, Friday sermon, pointing out a very simple fact, that these statues, these idols, had survived 1,400 years. They were around during the time of our Master Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They were around during the time of the Khulafa Rashideen. They were around during the time of the great Muslim empires that followed, all of whom knew Islam far greater than the so-called Daesh scholars today. Yet, it didn't occur to any of them to destroy these statues. Somehow now Daesh has magical knowledge to destroy them. So, whether we want to look at the Quranic example, whether we want to look at the prophetic example, or whether we want to look at the example of Muslims throughout history, regardless of sect, regardless of nationality, we find a consistency in what my brother just mentioned of La ikraha fid din. There shall be no compulsion in religion. Why? Because the right has been made distinct from the wrong. And I'll close with this really important point, that many people forget, many critics especially forget, that this verse, La ikraha fid din, was not revealed when the Prophet was powerless. This was revealed when the Prophet gained worldly power, when he could have theoretically enforced Islam on anyone who didn't obey him or didn't submit to his rule. But instead, this verse was revealed when the Prophet had power to make a clear line of demarcation, that just because you have worldly power now, do not for a moment think that you can treat people the way you were treated. Instead, protect universal religious freedom, and it is through this method of protecting universal religious freedom that Islam truly spread. Because Islam's argument is that its inherent nature, its inherent beauty, is what makes it powerful. The founder of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, whom we consider the Messiah and Mahdi, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, writes that religion, which needs the sword to validate its truthfulness, needs no other proof of its falsification. The sword it wields cuts its own throat before reaching others. And so we say, for the love of God, honor the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and you do so by celebrating universal religious freedom, including for those who worship idols. Thank you.
I think we have time for a few more questions, and I'd like to ask Imam Bashar, but I'd be interested in what anyone else has to say about this as well, is these young people, but some older ones, but a lot of younger people are leaving their homes and their families from all over the world, and they are coming to what they think is the caliphate, and they're dying. They know that there's a real chance of their dying. They know that their lives may be completely disrupted. Why are they doing this? And are they considered by most Muslims martyrs? Because I think they are told, and certainly we know what the young men are told when they're martyrs. give me an idea of what this is about.
Thank you. I just would like to mention that Islam came to ask the people how to live and how to give life to others, not to die and give death to others. Islam came to ask the young people and ask the communities to learn from the experiences of others and apply it to themselves and also live a peaceful life. Those who are going there today, by the witness and by the account of all the Muslim scholars around the world, that what those people are doing is completely against the teachings of Islam when they are going, and all what I'm seeing images from them, just AK-47 behind them. I was in Turkey last year and they were showing me the curriculums of their schools where second grade and third grade and fourth grade students are studying with books where you will see Kalashnikov, always in these textbooks. For God's sake, what this AK-47 is doing in these curriculums and in these textbooks. So that's why the scholars of today are saying this is not, when they call it Islamic State, this is not Islamic and this is not a state, this is not caliphate. The Quran is telling me to live around the world. The Quran is not telling me to go and live in Syria only and to live in Iraq only. The Quran is telling me to come and live in the United States, to live in Europe, to live anywhere, because this is God's earth. And I have to be part of the movement for bringing justice and equality. And if I will die for these principles, this is martyrdom, not to kill others and for the sake of martyrdom.
Does anybody else have any thoughts about, I'm still, I'm sorry we lost our extremist early on, but it's former extremist, yes. But at least he had some, I still don't understand. I mean, you read about these young women in England who were 15 and 16 and 17 and who just get on a bus and go to Syria or young men and join ISIS when they can see on television what's really going on and how awful the life is. What is it? I mean, and as you're talking about, this is more about politics than it is about theology, but they seem to think that it's about theology and I guess martyrdom, but where do they, when you're talking about the madrasas and the schools where they're taught about these things, those are only in Muslim countries, but what is it that compels people who don't get that kind of education to suddenly turn around and decide this is the life they want?
Well, if I can offer some insight, I mean, one of the things that we've done within the Ahmadiyya Muslim community worldwide, we're in over 200 countries, is focus on youth development and creating an infrastructure to channel the concerns that youth have into something productive. And so, regardless of sect, all Muslims agree that the two fundamental responsibilities of every Muslim are Haququllah and Haququl Abad, service to God and service to humanity. And on this element of service to humanity, we place an immense focus that your responsibility, again, as my brother said, that Islam came to give life. Your focus, your purpose is to always engage in acts that serve humanity and advance the causes of humanity. Unfortunately, when you have a combination of inconsistent Muslim leadership, especially in some of these Muslim majority countries, and you combine that with very poor, almost barbaric Western foreign policy. For example, during this presidential administration, Western bombs have killed an average of 12 Muslim civilians a day. And when you combine that, sheer barbarity with this weak or incorrect understanding of Islam, it is very easy to manipulate the mind of somebody who is naive or ignorant to think that they are waging some form of holy war, some kind of holy concept. It's no accident that these youths that are being caught going to join Daesh have just purchased Islam for dummies. And so the solution to that is more consistent Muslim leadership on educating our youth and working with Western governments to employ better foreign policy that doesn't become fodder to try to radicalize or propagandize fighting the West as some kind of a holy war when it's clearly not.
Do I have time for one more question?
So
well, I think everybody wants to speak up a little bit. Do I have time, after we finish this, do I have time for one more question?
I think it's time to wrap up if there's like a minute or so.
Well, let me just ask one more question because it's something that you started, I mean, that you in your introduction actually said, and that that is voiced everywhere in the world except in Muslim countries, which is that why don't more Muslims speak out against terrorism? And I mean, I think that everybody says that. And when you see that the people who are really suffering and the most people who are getting killed are Muslims. And yet you find, and people will say, well, they're afraid because they're afraid they'll get killed. But you find that this is the constant criticism of moderate Muslims or real followers of Muhammad, that they're not speaking out enough about terrorism.
Quick point. A quick point. Okay. ISIS had done more grave damage to Islam and Muslims than all the extremist organizations had done so far, Al-Qaeda, Taliban, and so on. That's what ISIS so far did. And that will take a long time for erase from the minds of the people the wrong picture of Islam they have created. So it is our duty to go back from this conference, especially every sister and brother go as an ambassador of peace. Go to your neighbors and tell them we are coming from a conference, and that was the content of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you. So Sally, you know, we've been hearing this perennial question, where are the Muslims and why don't they speak out? And this is the speaking out. I mean, it doesn't get bigger than 375 pages and 72 Muslim scholars. You're just seeing a little taste of it here, right?
Yes.
And we have painstakingly done the research of every condemnation that we have been able to call together, and we have a page on the website and a link on the website so that everybody here can send that link to everybody. Because if anybody ever asks you, why aren't Muslims condemning? You don't only have to cite us today. You have to go all the way back to 9/11 and see how many condemnations Muslims have done. The problem is, we are not a central authority. Other than you, you're lucky. You have central authority, and maybe some Shia have central authority. The Sunni majority Muslim community does not have a central authority. So everyone is speaking for themselves in their own communities, and every imam is a leader for his own community. And they are condemning, but the collective voice is not coming together. And this was my effort of bringing that collective voice together. Yes. And I hope, and like I said, it's 72, magically turned out to be 72 scholars. There must be some divine intervention, because 72 in Arabic expression means many, thousands. So this 72 people are representing the global Muslim voice.
Well, I think, I have to say I am really honored to be part of this moment of speaking out. And I don't think that there's anyone in this country who has spoken out more and more forcefully than Daisy Khan and Imam Faisal. I mean, I think they are just heroes in my view for what they've done and how courageous they've been. And I know that the problem, and you and I have talked about this, the problem is that the Muslims don't have a pope. There's not that one central voice that says, this is what we believe, so that when something goes wrong, you know, that person speaks out against all of this violence. And I think you're right, that it's done individually, and I think it's harder that way, but it'll take more time. But I think if we have more people like Daisy and Imam Faisal, it'll